Hello learners, I welcome you all to the second segment of ninth lecture. So in this lecture we will be looking at the Soviet reforms, Soviet Union's reforms. And if we look at Soviet Union reforms, following the Soviet Revolution, there was a huge backlash to the principles that the capital exporting countries were trying to assert. So they were trying to assert certain principles that afforded protection to foreign investment, right? But when the new Soviet government came to power in 1918, it started socializing the industry systemically, and when it started doing that, it did not distinguish between its own nationals and foreigners. It sort of undertook a massive reforms at a large scale without distinguishing between Soviet Union nationals and foreigners. When the Allies tried to demand compensation, the Soviet Union took a counterclaim and imposed retrospective taxes for the reparation of profits that had happened in the previous decades. So the Allies tried to break Soviet Union through military action. That did not happen. Then there was collective economic sanctions that were imposed on Soviet Union. It did not make much of an impact because the Soviet Union itself wanted to disentangle from the West completely. So therefore, collective economic sanctions did not make much of an impact in the context of Soviet Union. So now what had happened was the Soviet Union tried to amicably resolve this issue, and there was the meeting that had happened in Genova, Italy, and there was this meeting that happened in Hague in 1922. So but these meetings did not yield any substantial result, and they all ended in a stalemate. Britain, what it did was, Britain saw that there were oil reserves in Soviet Union. So Britain proposed that Soviet Union can have its own economic reconstruction, like a reconstruction of the economy, and that reconstruction of the economy should be done through foreign investment. What Britain tried to do was, Britain tried to distinguish between generally what amounts to expropriation with that of Soviet expropriation, because Soviet expropriation means, they were expropriating, they were actually socializing the means of production. So Britain sort of brought in this distinction. So Britain wanted an Soviet reconstruction of its economy with the help of foreign investment, because it was interested in the oil reserves that was there. But the US was stubborn. US wanted restitution of Standard Oil's property. US was very stubborn. It didn't attend the European conferences also. We can also see the same in the context of France and Belgium as well, because French and Belgian investors had made large investments in Soviet Union. So France and Belgium also wanted restitution and not compensation. So the United States, France and Belgium, all of them actually spoke about they did not want a settlement that to happen which the Britain was proposing. So that was not the idea of United States, France and Belgium. And eventually what Soviet Union did was, it followed prisoner's dilemma idea. So it started negotiating bilateral commercial treaties with individual countries as per the terms that was favorable to Soviet Union. Germany was the first country to sign such treaty. Once Germany tried, all other countries also started individually signing treaties with Soviet Union, because it had new concessions in Soviet Union was again profitable. So what the oil companies tried to do was, oil companies, they tried to take a unified actions, and when they tried to take a unified actions, eventually they also did not pursue this much, because there were new Soviet concessions that were coming up, and those were very profitable opportunities for the oil companies. So they did not want to forego those potential profitable opportunities as well. So what we see in the context of Soviet Union was, even when Allies tried to take some action against Soviet Union, they also did not agree on the policy. There was no one policy that they agreed on. They were divided with regard to their policies as well, and no one country was powerful enough to impose effective sanction against Soviet Union. So the approach was different. So with that, even the oil companies also saw the future possible future possible favorable concessions. So there was not much the challenge that had happened with regard to the protection standards, right? I mean, they did not assert the protection standards very vigorously in case of Soviet Union expropriation. So this is something we could say that until 19th century, the way in which the capital exporting countries try to protect the foreign investment, that sort of became weaker in the context of Soviet Revolution. Following Soviet Revolution, there were other reforms that had happened in the Eastern European region as well. And they were very modest reforms. They were not as severe as that of the reforms that were undertaken by Soviet Union. For instance, you can see there were land distribution program in Yugoslavia, Romania is modern day Romania, then Czechoslovakia, Poland, Latvia. In these countries, there were some land redistribution program that had happened, and with that land distribution program, there were not much of a challenge to the international property rules or the protection standards of foreign investment, because you take Poland for instance. Poland, although it was undergoing a land, I mean it was taking a land redistribution program, at the same time it was also attracting foreign capital into the country. So it was not like a challenge to the protection standards, but rather there were some modest reform that had happened. So we could see that there was not much of a challenge to the protection standards of foreign investment in the context of Eastern European region. But Soviet Revolution was the biggest challenge to the protection standards of foreign investment. So with that we conclude our second segment. In the next segment we will look at Turkey's reform and how Turkey had challenged the protection standards to foreign investment. Thank you.